This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hello and welcome. My name is Madison and I'm by myself today. And you are listening to Who's Knocking, which is yet another true crime podcast. So, I'm by myself today. Why? Hannah's away. That's all you need to know. So I'm taking over the show, and this is, I don't know how that's going to go. Hopefully well, we'll see. I think that the likelihood that me recording by myself completely exacerbates my level of weirdness is likely. I'm not positive, but we'll see. I've been described as an awkward person, so you be the judge. Let me know. And oh God, I'm really like breathy and out of breathy because I'm super pregnant and my ribs are beginning to splay and my lungs are being crushed all the time, and I'm very uncomfortable and it's hot in here and I'm in a closet, so I will try my best to not sound like that. What's new with me? Well, this week from Sunday to Wednesday, my entire family was completely and utterly eviscerated by a stomach bug or food poisoning. We don't know. It was awful. There was so much vomit everywhere. My 4-year-olds cannot aim vomit anywhere. They just vomit on everything. Bless their little souls, but God, it was awful. I did so much laundry. Sorry if this is too much information. I vomit. Sorry, if you don't like vomit, skip a little bit of this because I have to tell somebody, but having a stomach bug while pregnant, that's a really weird thing because it's like I was super nauseous, and then on top of it, I have this like full-size baby in my belly that's like swirling around and making me more nauseous, and that was really weird. And yeah, it was horrible. So apparently there's a stomach bug going around. Try your best not to get it because it's the worst. And now I have a lot of really clean linens because I had to wash them all. So yeah. What is new true crime wise? I don't know. I don't really know anything new. I mean, since the woman was found partially dismembered in garbage bags in Leslieville, there have since been 2 more people in my general area found, not necessarily dismembered that I'm aware of, but in dumpsters, which is, it seems like a lot of people left in dumpsters or garbage-like situations. I don't know. 3 seems like a lot. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Me and Hannah were trying to figure out if that's a lot, but it sounds like a lot to me. And one of them I found out recently was actually a child. There's an area in Toronto called Rosedale, which is where this one body was found in a dumpster, and they had just put it out that a body was found in a dumpster, in a construction dumpster, and then we learned that it had been there for about a year, and then we learned that it was of a 4 to 6-year-old child, which is horrible. I really have a hard time with, I keep saying I have a hard time with little, kids being, of course I do. Yeah, it's horrific. So I don't know if we find out more about any of these, we can talk about it. But so far we just know 3 in the last couple months. That's a lot. That is a lot. So anyway, I guess I'll just get right into it. I don't know if this is going to be a 1-part or a 2-part. I think there's enough information here for a 2-part, but I don't have Hannah with me, so Maybe I'll get through the information faster. I think it'll still be a 2-part, but maybe the parts will be shorter. Do you, like, what length of video? Or I guess partly a video and partly a podcast, but what lengths of time do you guys like? There's so much variation. I tend to like really long stuff, but that's just me. I'm not the only person. So this is an experiment. We'll see. You let me know. Hit me up. So we're talking today about the death of Phoebe Hansjuk. And now there's a lot of speculation and back and forth as to whether or not this is a death, a suicide, or a murder. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and we'll get to that. I'm not going to tell you what I think. I don't even really know what I think, to be honest, but it's also a pretty popular story. I've seen it done a number of times, but there are some updates even from when I first learned about the case. So I thought it would be a good one to get into. It's technically solved, kind of, but I think to the internet it kind of seems unsolved. So we're going to get into it, and you're going to let me know what you think, and hopefully Hannah watches this and lets us know what she thinks. Oh God, the summer is upon us. So let's get into it. Oh, what do I rate it, you ask? I don't know. I think this is like a 5. I don't find it particularly scary or anything, and I don't know, but you tell me. Sorry, I have nobody to talk to. It's weird talking by yourself. Some people are really good at it, and they make it look easy. It's kind of weird. Anyway, shall we? So, Phoebe Hansjuk was born on May 9th, 1986 I think she was born in Melbourne, Australia. We're going to go with that. To her father, Len, and her mother, Natalie. Len is and was a psychiatrist, and her mother, Natalie, is and was a veterinarian. So suffice it to say, Phoebe Hansjuk had a very idyllic childhood, it seems. She grew up in a pretty big house in Melbourne, Australia with her father and mother and her 2 brothers. Sorry, that was my fingers cracking. Awkward. And she was very close in particular with her brother Tom. So Phoebe was a very adventurous child. She was described as like a really fun, impulsive, social, free child. She was a very beautiful girl, very vibrant, and often the center of attention. She definitely sounds like the type of girl that you kind of like wish you were at that time. Yeah, so she's described as like a really lovely child, a lot of friends, like to just like very impulsively do things like climbing trees. Yeah, she seemed like a really cool kid. Then around Phoebe's teen years, I believe, Len and Natalie did get a divorce. And I think that Phoebe took that very hard. She took it very hard. That's what she said. She didn't take it well. That's how you say that, right? And the divorce did sound very bad. It resulted in her parents not even speaking to each other for a number of years. So that to me indicates like that's a bad divorce if you can't even talk to your. I mean, I think that if you have 3 kids and you get a divorce, like you want to try to communicate, but they did not talk for a number of years, so that's intense. So although Phoebe was very fun and beautiful and very well liked by her friends, she was definitely a bit of a troubled young woman. According to one of her friends, at about age 13, her and her group of gal pals started partying and going to clubs with fake IDs. And although they had very little to no money, they usually had no trouble finding guys to buy them drinks and give them free drugs. And that to me is insane. At age 13, I looked like a little boy, and nobody was letting me into a club. I don't care if it was like the most sketchy club in the world. This is no way. But I don't know what Australia's like, but yeah, that's pretty crazy to me. But they did that apparently, and through all that partying, Phoebe got pretty heavily into a lot of party drugs like cocaine, ecstasy, and LSD. And those are pretty intense drugs. Those are big ones. So to be doing that kind of thing at 13, 14, 15, like even if she didn't start doing any of those till like 16, 17, like that's a lot. That's a lot for a really young person. I think that can really warp you. So that's what was going on there. Now, Phoebe's friends describe her as very beautiful with a mysterious air about her. She, I think a lot of people after they die, everyone's like, oh, she like lit up a room or whatever. But she definitely, it seems as though like she was the type of person who like, when she did walk into a room, all eyes would be on her, and like everyone would be like, oh, who's that girl? Because she's really attractive, and like she's very, she like drew people to her, and she definitely, from a young age, had an effect on men, guys, males, I don't know. And I think she was aware of that too. So it's an interesting part of her personality, because that would definitely affect her. And she was very creative. She was a big writer. She wrote a lot. And she drew, and she was also very physically fit. She participated in kickboxing and karate, and apparently was very talented at both of those. In particular, karate. She was able to get herself a black belt in 2 years. And apparently that's very impressive. I know nothing about karate. So if anyone else out there is a karate or black belt, let me know. But people online said that was really impressive. It sounds impressive. So she was like at the gym or the dojo or whatever all the time, practicing and training, and was really good, which is impressive. It's impressive to me. Well, I guess maybe the drugs help with something like that, but it's like people who party a lot and then also, I think that goes together. I know people who party a lot and they're like always at the gym. Makes them feel like they're being healthy. Anyway, one very disturbing thing about Phoebe, well, yeah, I'd say it's kind of disturbing, but Phoebe had this real penchant for older men. And from a very young age, it was described that Phoebe would pretty much like find an older man, be it a neighbor or a teacher, for example, and completely fixate on them, and in a very obsessive way. Which I don't know, like I think, I don't like to judge people's relationships, and I think for the most part, like people should, do themselves, you do you, is what I'm trying to say. But especially when it is a minor, and in this situation Phoebe was a minor, that's like very predatory on the men's part. And also it's just, I wonder what it is that drew her to such older men, because I think it was my understanding through what I read, but not explicitly stated, that her relationship with her dad was not bad, but the relationship between her parents was not good. So this led to, for example, when she was in year 10, which is age 16 in Australia, Phoebe began a relationship with her 30-year-old teacher, which is insane. That's basically double your age, and you're 16, so sorry, but you know nothing. And that relationship was technically illegal, as it should be, but everybody around claimed that their relationship was a genuine, and they used the term healthy, relationship. The teacher ended up switching schools for the 16-year-old girl and actually living at Phoebe's mother's house. And this was described as a multi-year stable relationship. So, I don't know, that I don't know what to make of that. I don't want to like be super judgy, but also like that's illegal, and like you're a 30-year-old man, you shouldn't do that. What are your thoughts on this? Because I don't know, and Hannah's not here to argue with me, so I don't know. Phoebe's mother said that, and this is where I think it kind of makes a little bit more sense as to why it was described this way, but Phoebe's mother said that she had she's like, basically describes Phoebe's life as like exactly what her life was. She was the same way. And I've seen a lot of interviews with her. Phoebe's mother is like a very beautiful woman too, and like she like claims that she's also into older men. She said she had a relationship with an older teacher when she was also 16. Phoebe's father, Len, is 14 years old older than Natalie. 14 years older than Natalie, sorry. And I have to assume that this is why her mother allowed this type of relationship to occur in her home. Seems like again, you never know unless you're in that situation, but it seems to me that if my daughter came home at 16 years old with a 30-year-old boyfriend or whatever, I would be like, no, get the leave. But I don't know. Maybe you don't want to, maybe that just pushes them away. Who knows? But maybe you just call the cops. Anyway, not all of her fixations, however, or relationships were described as healthy. I think that was kind of the healthiest sounding one. And once she was enrolled, like, here's an example. She was once enrolled in an art class, and she essentially, apparently, harassed the teacher by sending him letters constantly, asking him to have an affair with her until she was kicked out of the class. Because I guess this guy, like, was not having it. And get on him, because that's, not good. So I think another trait that was used to describe all of Phoebe's relationships was her tendency to kind of go all in. And she really gave every relationship her all, and she fell in love very easily. So I think part of that is like she seemed like very vulnerable, and but it sounds a little bit more like an actual fixation than like falling in love, if you know what I mean. And it's hard to know, who knows, but it seemed like, there's always those people who just like need to be in relationships all the time and like need to get really into it. And there's people who don't, and that's just, I guess differences in people. But yeah, it sounds to me, I don't really know what it sounds like, but it just sounds not super healthy. So we'll see where this goes. So at age 15, Phoebe actually ran away from her house for 8 weeks. Just another tidbit, another fact about her life, and an example of, I think, her kind of impulsiveness, her maybe feelings of resentment towards her parents. It's just another aspect of her life that proves her general unhappiness, I guess. At age 16, Phoebe was prescribed antidepressants, which her parents were not happy about. And I think, her father's a psychiatrist, so he kind of, is aware of what exactly this does and who was prescribed these things and why, etc. But she was prescribed these, and her parents couldn't do anything about it. Her mother said that Phoebe would take herself on and off the antidepressants constantly, and of course, no doubt, she would be mixing them with other things like drugs and alcohol and stuff, and so that was very concerning for her parents. Again, it seems like she's doing all these things. Her parents are well aware that she's doing these things, but I don't know if it's that they don't want to stop her, they can't stop her. I mean, once somebody's 16, like, I don't know what you do besides, like, what can you do besides take things away? I don't know. Phoebe was very close with her family. They seemed to know what was going on. And she was also very close with her grandmother, Jeanette. And Jeanette is Phoebe's mother's mother. Jeanette would talk to Phoebe often about her life and her relationships and her problems. And Jeanette always provided a completely non-judgmental ear, and she could always keep a secret. So I think Phoebe definitely thrived with people who were non-judgmental. So yeah, that's a bit about her life and her upbringing and where she was at. She was definitely not in a great mental headspace. And she seemed to be kind of self-medicating with drugs and alcohol and putting herself in relationships that were not the healthiest. So in 2010, she was in a relationship with an older man, and they were living together in a very high-end building in Melbourne, and she was 24 at the time. And this is where Phoebe's young life would unfortunately end under very strange circumstances, let's just say. So it was December 2nd, 2010, and I'm going to walk us through the Phoebe's day, the events of the day. So Phoebe was sleeping. She was sleeping off a very severe drinking drug binge that she had gone on for the last 2 days, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. So her boyfriend's name is Anthony Hampel, and he's a big player in this, and we will get a lot more into him later. But for now, we're just going to go with it. So at 9 a.m., Anthony left for work. And I think I'm going to call him Ant for the rest of this, because that's what a lot of people called him, Ant. So he left for work, and when he left for work, he said Phoebe was sleeping in bed with her dog peacefully. And the last 2 days had been rough, so I think he said that she was sleeping peacefully, and he just wanted to let her continue sleeping. At 11:30 a.m., a fire alarm evacuated the whole building for about 7 minutes. Phoebe was caught on security camera exiting and re-entering with everyone else at 11:50 a.m. For the next 6 hours, nobody saw or heard from Phoebe at all. At 6:09 p.m., Ant's fob is recorded as swiping into the elevator, and then he arrived home. Ant claimed that he came in and found no one home, but Phoebe's purse and keys were there, sitting on a table. And it was odd because she wasn't home, and they had dinner plans with Phoebe's father, who had just had a birthday the day before. And it was odd that her keys and her purse were there because she wasn't there, and if she wasn't there, she would have had her purse and keys with her. The house was also in a bit of a disarray, which was unusual. There were 2 empty wine glasses and shards of broken glass on the floor. There was blood smeared on the doorway, on the desk, and on the computer mouse. And there were a number of post-it notes with odd writings on them scattered throughout the apartment, and some photos of her cat and dog on the bed, which he described as like a little shrine. And there were candles burning, and a hair curler was plugged in. So a lot of things going on. And he didn't really do anything about this, but I think he just kind of decided he was going to wait it out. Sometime between 7:06 and 7:09 p.m., a member of the building's concierge team went looking for a broom in the refuse room, which I guess we would call a garbage room, but in Australia they call it a refuse room. Now, for anybody unfamiliar with how garbage chutes work in large buildings, every floor has a chute, which is basically a room, and in the room is a chute, which is just like a little door that pulls out, and you plop your garbage in, and the garbage all falls down through all the floors and lands in a big bin. And some of them have big like compactors at the bottom to kind of compact the garbage and make it smaller. And this system they had in this building. And at the bottom, that is the refuse room or the garbage room. So when she opened the door, there was something in the way, and she kind of like shoved it harder. And when she got the door open, she realized that what had been blocking the door was Phoebe's dead body. Her foot was nearly severed from her leg, and there was a lot of blood. And Phoebe's pants were pulled down to her knees, and her belt was only through 2 out of 5 loops in her pants. During this time, so take that in, that's what happened. That's how she was found, and that's horrible. Now, during this time, Anthony is upstairs. He's waiting out the situation, apparently. He's making phone calls, work phone calls, other phone calls. He's having a beer and a cigarette and ordering takeout for one. And then the food arrived. The food arrived at 8:03 p.m. The person who delivered his food to him told him that there were police down in the front of the building. An aunt went downstairs to inquire about their presence and was informed that a woman's body had been found. And Anthony immediately put it all together, started telling and asking about the woman they had found, giving them identifying features of Phoebe, and they confirmed shortly after that that the dead body was the body of Phoebe Hansjuk. Now, the investigation with this was shit. It was horrible. So I'll tell you a little bit about that now. So Phoebe was found lying on the floor in the refuse room. It appeared that after she made it down the chute and through the compactor, she survived, but her foot was severed almost completely. It was hanging on by like tissue, not like the bone was done. And she crawled around for a bit, presumably trying to get out of the room. But eventually, after only a couple minutes, she bled out entirely, and that is what killed her. She had sunglasses nearby. We presume that they were on top of her head. And as I said, her pants had been pulled down to around her knees. So in the garbage chute room on the 12th floor, which I don't know if I mentioned this, but she was on the 12th floor, so that's where she fell from, or that's where she entered the chute. There was some blood found on the doorway of the 12th floor garbage chute room. Now, the chute itself, which is like a stainless steel, there was no blood on that, and also no discernible fingerprints. It did have smudges and stuff, so it did not look like it had been wiped clean, but they could not find like any identifiable fingerprints or palm prints or anything on that door. When the police got to the scene, they pretty much immediately decided that this was a case of suicide and that that's surely how she had died. They refused to allow the paramedics to check for signs of life because they were sure that she was dead. And they also did not call a pathologist to come and check out the body. So they were unable to get an accurate time of death. They could only say that since nobody had spoken with Phoebe since around noon that day, the time of death was somewhere between noon and 7 p.m. So this is not a scientific indication of like based on temperature or anything. This is purely based on the time of when people last saw her to the time that she was found. So it's a big window. The police did not secure the apartment. They did not keep logs of who was in and out of these locations or the building as a whole. None of the exits or entrances were locked down, so anyone could have came and went and nobody would have had any way of knowing except for the security footage. But don't worry, we'll get to that. They also did not collect any electronics from her apartment, and they only tested the blood on the door trim, which did turn out to be Phoebe's. So they did not test the blood on the mouse or the computer. They did not request CCTV footage from the building, which, what the fuck, you guys? So Adam Giamoro, the Valencia building manager, says that he was prepared to hand over all the CCTV footage. He was like, yeah, obviously, like he was ready, getting it ready, and assumed that they would want it. He told the police that it would be saved for 2 days and then it would be automatically taped over. That's how their system worked, which I think is pretty common. Eric wanted the police to take the system's hard drive on the spot, but the police were simply not interested. Eric was very weirded out by this. About 2 days later, they asked Eric to get the company, the police asked Eric to get the company who services the CCTV system to come and collect the DVR, which is the recording system, and start downloading and saving footage. But by that time, only 2 out of 16 cameras still had available footage. He friggin' told you guys, so I don't know why. Like, why? Later, out of frustration, Lauren, Phoebe's grandfather and an ex-detective, who we'll meet a little bit later, he asked Eric for the hard drive to see if there was any way that he could retrieve the footage. So Eric went down to storage to go get it, and it could not be located. And to this day, it has never been found, just mysteriously vanished. Nobody knows. What the hell? So how did she get down there is the big question. So Phoebe somehow went feet first into the garbage chute and actually survived the 30-meter or 11-floor drop. And it seems at the very end, there's some sort of 45-degree angle that would have slowed her fall at the end. But the blade of the hydraulic compactor sliced her ankle, leaving her right foot, as I said, almost completely severed. So she bled out in the 5 to 10 minutes that she was crawling around on the floor. So here's what the autopsy report said. Phoebe's blood level was 0.16, which is 3 times the normal driving limit in Australia. She had also recently taken a sleeping pill called Zolpidem, more commonly known as Stilnox. Stilnox had been known to be linked to bizarre behavior. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but yeah. Despite her pants being found to have been pulled down, there were no obvious signs of sexual assault. And Phoebe's actual death resulted in blood loss from the injury to her ankle. And I think it's worth noting, too, that just because there's no obvious signs of sexual assault does not mean there was no sexual assault. A lot of times, how you can't tell. It's not obvious. So after this very terrible investigation, the police called it a suicide, and that was it. But most people think that there's a lot more to the story. So first, I would like to introduce you to Phoebe's boyfriend, and we will get into their relationship. So, Anthony Hamble was born August 1st, 1967. The couple met in 2009 when Phoebe was 23 and Ant was 42. At the time, Phoebe was working as a receptionist at a high-end hair salon. And Ant comes from a very prominent legal family. His father is George Hamble, and he is a retired Supreme Court judge. And his stepmother is Felicity Hamble and is a serving county court judge. George and Felicity were very well respected in their legal fields and were considerably wealthy and successful and very well connected. Ant also has an older sister, Christina Hample, who Phoebe would end up becoming very close with, and who she gets herself into a little bit of trouble later. Maybe we'll talk about that. Now, Anthony, was a very successful events promoter. He was a founder and director of an events management company, and that events management company catered to a lot of A-list celebrities and big global companies. I know, like Paris Hilton was a client, and lots of people like that, and like big tech companies and whatever. They did very well. Being in a relationship with Ant was very exciting, presumably. He was rich and he was successful, and he spent a lot of time in the company of Melbourne's social elite. Ant also helped Phoebe get a part-time job at one of his friend's marketing companies. And so she spent her time working there and continuing to party and join Ant in his social life. Now, Phoebe didn't earn much working part-time and often didn't even show up for work, resulting in her having very little money. And Anthony paid for a lot of Phoebe's life, it seems. Now, Phoebe's family noted that Anthony was very different from a lot of her previous relationships. She usually went for kind of grungy, arty type guys, musicians and actors and like thinkers and writers, like that type of guy. And Ant was not like this at all. Although her family believed that he was, not really the one for her, they had no issues with him, and they found him to be a generally nice guy. He even helped one of the brothers get a job. So they didn't have any problems with him, but they were like, whatever. A lot of friends did lose touch with Phoebe when she started dating Anthony. Sorry, I really hate that his name is not Anthony. It's like, why not the H? So this tends to be a pretty common thing when people get into serious relationships, but I think probably especially for someone like Phoebe who tended to just like dive in head first into her relationships, and kind of, it seems like a good way to describe it is like she kind of would lose herself in relationships and let them be taken over by the other people. And that's definitely seemed like the case here, or at least her perspective on her relationship. But yeah, Antony and Phoebe appeared to definitely have a pretty rocky relationship. And they went through a lot of breakups, apparently at least 4 times in the 6 weeks leading up to her death. Phoebe's dad said that Phoebe was thinking about leaving him, actually, but feared doing so because she said that he was so controlling and she knew that he wouldn't like the idea of her leaving him. Apparently, they were supposed to go on a trip to Paris later that December, I think around December 21st, and she kind of was freaking out because she was afraid that he would propose to her, and she didn't want that to happen. Many people, including Phoebe, describe Antony as controlling in their relationship. And like Phoebe would describe it as like she didn't have a voice in their relationship, and that they weren't equals. And this was obvious for anyone who visited their apartment, for example. It was very neat. It was professionally cleaned and like full of expensive things and everything. But besides the odd photo of Phoebe and Antony, you would never know that Phoebe lived there. Which is like pretty crazy for somebody who's like so creative and like into art and music and things. Like, she seems like the type of person where like if she had her own space, it would be decorated in like a really interesting way and very unique and original and all that. But they basically lived in like a museum that was just cleaned by someone else all the time and had no indication that she was actually living there, which is kind of sad. At the time, the couple was living in the prestigious Valencia building. This was a high-end building full of wealthy people, and they had moved in together after only being with each other for a few months. I think it was about 3 months. Phoebe was paying Antony rent to live there, and she was described on the lease as both tenant and girlfriend. And she was paying a very low amount. I think she was paying like $150 a week, which I think this is 2010. I don't know what prices are like in Australia, but this was apparently a really expensive building. That's definitely like not half the rent. But she also like barely went to work and didn't really make any money. So Antony said that when she didn't have money to pay, like he wouldn't make her pay. But that was like the setup. So, yeah. According to Phoebe's father, Antony described Phoebe to the police as my flatmate when they discovered her body, and he found that very offensive, and reasonably so if that's true. In the few days after Phoebe's death, including the day of her death, Phoebe's parents and Antony's parents had all gathered in the apartment. Antony was mostly off in a room by himself, or with some sort of like hypnotherapist or something, because he was he was like so grief-stricken, he needed all this help. And he was too grief-stricken to speak with anybody. And according to Phoebe's dad, George, Antony's father, like the first time that they got together after Phoebe's death, which was pretty immediately after, George just went right up to Len and immediately started talking about how troubled Phoebe was and how obviously this was a suicide. And Len said he wouldn't even make eye contact with him, and that all of Antony's family members, including Antony, immediately jumped on the suicide theory. And this really upset Len and Natalie. It's like they didn't even give them a second to breathe. Now, after Phoebe's death, Natalie made a lot of attempts to speak to Antony. Obviously, she wanted to hear from him. And the first few times, he claimed to be too grief-stricken to speak with her. Instead, his mother and family friend tried to, she came over to the apartment, and I think she was led to believe that Antony would be there, but he was off. He couldn't. And so Antony's mother and her friend just basically tried to take over all the funeral arrangements or memorial arrangements, and they were suggesting some big elaborate ceremony on the beach with tons of flowers and all this bullshit. But Natalie didn't want to hear about any of this. She wanted to speak to Antony, and she left, and she was completely off-put by the whole situation. And then she texted Antony asking him to meet with her. when he felt up to it. And he did get back to her, and they planned to meet. So Natalie was talking to her father about this, Lauren. And Lauren is an ex-detective. I briefly mentioned him before. And Lauren is a pretty badass guy, and he gets very into this whole scenario. And I like Lauren. And he told her, I think he was kind of suspicious from the get-go, but he was like, you know what? If you meet with him, record the whole thing. Get a little recording device, record it. And she was like, I don't know, that's kind of a lot. And he's like, look, you're very grief-stricken right now. You don't know, you're not going to remember things properly. Not even to be sketchy, but just for your own sake, so that you can remember things accurately, record it. Don't tell him, but record it. And she was like, yeah, true. That's a good idea. And so she got a little recording device, and she met with Anthony, and she recorded the whole thing. And this secret recording is one of the only records we have of Anthony speaking about Phoebe's death. In it, he comes off as very grief-stricken. He's crying. He's very upset. Anthony was not alone when he met with Natalie. He was accompanied by his father, his mother, and his stepmother, which was a very intimidating crew for Natalie, who was by herself. Anthony spent the entire time staring off and never looking at Natalie in the eye. Seems this family really hates looking people in the eye. They're not good at it. Natalie asked him questions about the days leading up to Phoebe's death and how she was feeling and what she was doing. And okay, so here's what we've been able to piece together the week leading up to Phoebe's death. And this is based on statements made by Anthony in the secret recording, other people, and her electronic history. And just for a little bit of context before I get into it, Phoebe had 2 phones. One was an iPhone that actually belonged to Anthony, and he paid for it. And the second one was some sort of Nokia phone. I'm assuming flip, but I don't know. And to this day, that phone has never been found. So, Sunday, November 28th. Phoebe Skyped with her mother that night, and Natalie recalls Phoebe and Anthony had recently broken up, and so when she called Phoebe, she called her to talk about it, and she noticed that Phoebe was back in their shared apartment, and that was one of the first things that she asked about. And she was like, oh, I know that you're back there, you must be back together or whatever. But as soon as she mentioned Anthony, Phoebe kind of shushed her, and indicated that Anthony was nearby and she didn't want him hearing about that. And she said that they were watching a movie together. And so Natalie took the hint, didn't speak about it out loud, and figured that she'd talk to her about it later. And that was unfortunately the last time that Natalie would ever see Phoebe alive. Now, Monday, November 29th. In the morning, Phoebe saw her psychologist, who reported her mood as very low. In the evening, Phoebe and Aunt went out for dinner with some friends, Matt and Julia Rockman, and also a mutual friend named Vanessa Levin. Oh, no, they didn't go out for dinner with Vanessa Levin, but Phoebe recounted this event of this dinner to Vanessa Levin. Her and Phoebe spoke extensively about this dinner. Now, she said that it was pretty awful, and she said that Anthony kept shutting Phoebe down, not letting her speak, and the whole dinner ended abruptly, did not go well. Later, in the parking lot of their building, the couple had a very big fight. It was a screaming match, and Phoebe left crying and called a friend of hers named Brendan Hessen, and Aunt went off to their unit and went to bed. So she called Brendan and asked him to meet her for a drink at a nearby bar. And Brendan was apparently a friend from her partying days. So Brendan met her and said that when they met up, she leapt into his arms, wrapping her legs around him. It seemed like she had had a few drinks, he said, definitely, but she was still wasn't out of control in any way. So the two of them had one drink together. They stayed at the bar for maybe half an hour total. And during this time, Phoebe's iPhone, she had her iPhone, and it was ringing constantly. And it was Anthony the entire time. He called a total of 27 times in 1 hour. And when they were standing outside after their drinks, Phoebe got so annoyed with the phone calls that she threw her phone across the street, breaking it. To what measure was this phone broken? I don't know. I don't know if it was just a screen. There's certain indications later that like it was broken to the point that it was not working. That to me is unclear. So anyway, after this phone breaking incident, Brendan went home, but Phoebe continued on and she went to her mother's house. Now, her mother had stated that the Skype call was the last time that she had ever seen Phoebe live, so I assume that her mother was either asleep or she was not home. But Phoebe ended up speaking with Natalie's boyfriend at the time, or whoever she was in a relationship with. There was no identifying. I don't know who this person was, but it was the person that Phoebe's mother was in a relationship with at the time, about her relationship issues and what she was going through. And then she eventually made her way out of the home. By Tuesday, November 30th, it was morning time when she returned to Antony's place. And by morning time, I mean like late at night, like post midnight. I'm not sure what exact time. I think it was like, it might have been like 12:30 or something. Phoebe was supposed to go to work that day, but she did not go in. Antony said that he and Phoebe spoke on the phone that morning after like he'd gone to work. And they had another disagreement about their fight the previous night. So they had a fight about the fight. At 8:33 a.m., Phoebe sent a message. And I'm not sure from what platform, or like it's just, to me it's a message. It's not like a text message from the iPhone. To Vanessa Levin that said, quote, "I left home last night again and I am lost," end quote. A similar message was sent to her brother Tom. Phoebe made a number of phone calls, and they had a landline in the home at the time. It's 2010, so those still exist. Phoebe made a number of phone calls, first to the Alfred Hospital's crisis line, then to her own doctor, then to her psychologist, Joanna Young. Joanna spoke to her for half an hour and noted that she was very distressed, in particular about her drinking and her relationship. Joanna did say that Phoebe inferred that she might harm herself, but did not say so explicitly. Joanna did not call anyone to check on Phoebe, which is something she regrets. Now, around 4 p.m., Phoebe texted her grandmother, Jeanette, quote, "I'm okay, I'll call you tomorrow, kiss kiss," end quote. Again, I don't know what phone this is from, if this is from the Nokia phone or from the iPhone. We'll see for reasons later. I assume it's the Nokia phone, but we'll see. According to Antony, Phoebe spent the night drinking and taking ecstasy with, quote, "some drug dealer," end quote. So this is night number 2 of drinking and drugs. And I think the night before, it doesn't seem like she got like obliterated, but she was drinking for quite a number of hours and she was out very late. I don't know if she did any drinking at her mother's house, but it seemed like it was at least a bad night for her mentally. Now, we're at Wednesday, December 1st. The building's fob records records. The building's fob records indicated that Phoebe arrived home Wednesday morning at 12:29 a.m. Phoebe sent this text message from her iPhone to her mother, grandmother, Antony, some other family members, and her boss early in the morning. So like sometime in around the 12:29 a.m. or later. This message is weird. It says, quote, "Hi family," and also this went to her boss. Quote, "Hi family, I'm in bed about to sleep, and when I wake, I will transform into the most incredible human being you've ever seen. Not. I will go to hospital. It's much safer there, and I hear the special tonight is tomato soup. Delicious, nutritious. I love you all very much, but not enough to send an individual text. Sorry about that. Time to sleep, and I must be on my way. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream." End quote. So that's a weird text message. And it does to me, though, is apparently if she spent the night drinking and taking ecstasy, it's not that weird. That sounds like a very ecstasy text message, if you ask me. But this message was sent from the iPhone. Natalie was worried about this text after reading it. She felt that Phoebe sounded like she was in some sort of trouble. Phoebe's grandmother, somebody who was very close with her, felt that it didn't sound like Phoebe at all. Although to me it sounds like somebody who's on ecstasy. Lauren, Phoebe's grandfather, who did not receive the text, was also very suspicious about the text. He claimed that Phoebe was known for taking a long time to sleep off these benders. And it was odd. He found that the whole message was perfectly typed, lacking any sort of spelling or grammatical errors. Okay. There are conflicting stories also about where the iPhone was at the time. You see, it was broken on Monday night, and Anthony said in the secret recording, but also in the official inquiry, which we'll find out a bit more about later, that he had taken it to a shop to be fixed. First, he said he had taken it to work with him on Wednesday and got it repaired. If this is the case, Phoebe could not have been responsible for the strange text. Does that make sense? Yeah, because, okay, apparently this text message I think was sent at like 10:30 a.m. It was sent post Anthony going to work, apparently. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so that's where it didn't really make sense. And Anthony later did change his story and said that he brought it into the shop on Thursday. There's no records at the repair shop, and the guy who owned it said he didn't remember. I guess it was some sort of like little random guy, whatever, that doesn't keep records. Now, I think it's very possible that Anthony didn't remember the date. That's not crazy. However, in the secret recording, he also said that the phone had been broken on Monday, and that's why on Tuesday Phoebe couldn't reply to anybody's texts or calls. So to me, that's an indication that the phone doesn't work. So if he says the phone doesn't work, but also we are to believe that Phoebe sent this message on Wednesday, that doesn't add up. So I do think that there could definitely be some sort of logical explanation here. There's two phones in the mix. There's weird messages being sent all over the place. We don't really know how broken the phone was, but this is the information we have. I think it's also possible that she could send messages when the phone was broken and that he was mistaken about that. We just don't know. But he did clearly say in the secret recording that the reason she didn't reply to people's messages on Tuesday was because the phone was broken. Take that how you will. So Phoebe's father and grandfather said that they saw the iPhone in the apartment on Thursday when they went over after finding out that she died. There is no proof of this, only their word. Especially given that the police didn't take any electronics or evidence. Weird. The only evidence we have is a receipt produced by Anthony's father, who was the one to pick up the phone from the repair shop a few days after Phoebe's death. So we do know that the phone went to a repair shop. We just don't know when it got there. Again, Phoebe had not gone to work on Wednesday. Halfway through the day, Anthony came home to check on Phoebe after her grandmother Jeanette requested that he do so. She had been worried about Phoebe because of the weird message. Now, at this time, Phoebe told Anthony that the night before that she had drinking and taken ecstasy. That's how he found out about that, apparently. And also that she had taken some sleeping pills. And now these sleeping pills were not prescribed to Phoebe. They were prescribed to Aunt. And he says that after hearing about this, he took the rest of the bottle with him so that she couldn't have any more. After being satisfied with her state of mind and being and everything, and knowing that their cleaning lady, Shelley, who they were like pretty close with apparently, would be there for the afternoon, Anthony decided it was cool for him to go back to work, and he did. Anthony claimed that things were peaceful Wednesday evening when he got home from work, and he was doing his best to comfort Phoebe and get things back on track. Now, Anthony described Phoebe's state as recovery mode. She was still hungover and not very conversational, but she was starting to beat herself up about the last few days and getting to be very self-loathing. And according to Antony, this drinking and drugs leading to anger and confrontational behavior, followed by depression and a kind of self-hating state, was a pattern that Phoebe tended to follow. She kind of went in these cycles where it happened in that pattern. And I think that's, to me, that sounds right. It sounds like the type of thing for somebody who's dealing with depression or anxiety, or a mix of the two. And it's a lot of this stuff is very cyclical. And so he described the Wednesday evening as her kind of tail end, and he called it recovery mode. But it was a very depressive, like a very low end for her. Now, Thursday, December 2nd, which is the day that Phoebe does die, Antony left for work in the morning. As I said, Phoebe was sleeping peacefully in bed with her dog. He says he called her multiple times during the day and that she never answered. Antony spent the day at work, in and out of meetings. He arrived home just after 6 p.m., as we know. He walked into the apartment to find the broken glass and the blood and the weird notes and her bag and her phone in the kitchen. And his reaction to this was, okay, I don't know what she's up to. Who knows? I better wait this out. Maybe she's out to dump some garbage and she'll be right back. Maybe something worse, but I better sit here and wait for her. As we noted before, they had dinner plans for that evening for around 7 p.m. with Phoebe's dad for his birthday at a Thai restaurant called the Golden Thai. Antony had himself a cigarette and a beer while he hung out. He made some phone calls. The first one was to a work colleague. The second was to his and Phoebe's friend, Vanessa. And then he called the Golden Thai restaurant and ordered takeout, only enough for one person. It's kind of weird. They're supposed to go there that evening. At about 6:51 p.m., Len called Phoebe's iPhone that should have been in the shop, and for all we know was, to tell her that he was running a bit late for their dinner reservation. Less than half a minute later, Antony called Len from his own phone to tell him that he doesn't know where Phoebe is. He failed to mention the blood or any of the weirdness, and this is the first time that Antony had ever called Len in his life. At around 8:03 p.m., the takeout food arrived. The delivery guy mentioned that the lobby was full of police. After Antony had gone downstairs and spoken to the police and put it all together, he and his father and stepmother and his friend Vanessa and her husband all gathered in Antony's unsealed apartment while the police did their thing around them. They spoke with the police about how obvious this was to be a suicide, about Phoebe's mental state, and Antony flooded them with his opinion and all of his knowledge, while George and Felicity were there, overseeing everything. So, Antony's behavior after the fact, I think we should chat a little bit about. Now, Antony and his family were pretty big players in this story. Since Phoebe's death, they have been very adamant about the suicide theory, as they had been since second one. And they've also been very tight-lipped, and they ended up throwing their own memorial service for Phoebe at a private yacht club, which many of Phoebe's close friends and family either didn't attend or did attend and found it to be in very poor taste. Antony's behavior has been very highly scrutinized by members of Phoebe's friends and family and the media, but not by the police in the slightest, who never considered him a suspect and never really did any investigation on him. Now, I'm going to discuss a lot of things that Antony did around the time of Phoebe's death. I would just like to make it clear that this information came to light without hearing from Antony himself, although that was his own choice. He hasn't really commented much on anything except for in the coroner's inquiry, which we'll talk about after. So just bear this in mind as I go forward. This is a little bit one-sided and probably a bit biased. But Antony is absolutely free to dispute any of it and say whatever he wants, but he chooses not to. So shortly after her death, Phoebe's parents had to go down to the police station to identify her body. Anthony was asked to do it, but he refused, saying that he didn't want to see her like that and that he didn't want to know how she died. That's okay. Anthony did, however, apply to be Phoebe's next of kin only 4 days after her death. His father, George, helped him fill out the paperwork, and Natalie only found out about this after she went down to the courthouse to try to collect Phoebe's body, and they said, no, you're not the next of kin. Anthony is. Anthony, who wouldn't even identify the body. Anthony did end up giving consent for Phoebe's body to be released to her parents after they asked for it. As soon as Phoebe's death was ruled a suicide, Anthony also put in a claim to Phoebe's superannuation fund to receive a death benefit payment. And he reached out to one of Phoebe's friends to ask her for a letter stating that he and Phoebe's de facto relationship was loving and genuine. Her friend was not impressed by this and refused to sign it. Interestingly, she said that she would never speak for Phoebe like that, and she had never heard the relationship described that way, so she didn't want to lie. So Anthony's dad, George, ended up signing a declaration verifying their relationship. And maybe it was an accident, maybe he didn't mean to, but he did overstate the length of time that Phoebe and Anthony had lived together by 6 months. He wrote that they were living together before they actually had even met. And they moved in together only 3 months after they started dating. So he had set the relationship to like starting and moving in together 3 months before that even happened. So it's shocking nobody. The things started getting super tense between Anthony and Phoebe's families. Anthony ended up handing over the $113,000 Australian dollars that he was granted, and he gave it to Phoebe's brothers. So it sounds like he keeps doing all these things, like, and I kind of assume that it's the dad being like, Anthony, like, you should do this. Anthony, you should do that. I'll help you with the paperwork, blah, blah, blah. And he's like collecting money. Oh, never mind, I'll give it to you. Being like, I'm going to be the next of kin. Oh, jokes, you can have her. Like, why do that? Vanessa, who was a friend to both Ant and Phoebe, was really weirded out by some of Anthony's behavior after the fact. And also for context, Vanessa had been Anthony's friend first. They had been close friends for 20 years. But Vanessa also grew quite close to Phoebe when she got to know her. So she seems kind of all over the place. She's like, she says things against Ant to the public, but also later after the inquiry no longer speaks to the media. So she's kind of an interesting character in all of this. She said that, well, during the official inquiry, that the days preceding Phoebe's death, Anthony would act super chill and normal and like be on Facebook chatting with people and stuff. And as soon as the Hansjuks would come over, his demeanor would switch and he would start crying and crunch up into a fetal position or like say he couldn't talk to anyone or blah, blah, blah. And like that, basically she's indicating that wasn't really how he was behaving and he was putting it on for them. At the inquiry, Anthony denied these allegations and said that he was just in shock and grieving. And to be fair, I do think if you are in shock and you're grieving, it's hard to judge somebody's actions. And we should kind of shy away from doing that. But somebody who's very close to him was doing that. And that's, to me, more of an indication than like me judging his after-the-fact behaviors. Another odd tidbit, Anthony and his friend / acquaintance named Brandon Christo. Brandon lived in the same building and on the same floor as Anthony, and they worked together at, I guess, the whatever promoter business that he had. Anthony said that they were really just work friends, that they didn't hang out outside of work, whatever. He downplayed their relationship. When they were working together or went on work trips, they would hang out and like be tight there, but like didn't hang out outside of that, he said. There are photos of the two of them partying on a boat on Facebook, so that exists. And I believe that the same person was on the phone. This was one of the people that that Anthony was on the phone with the night that Phoebe died, when he was waiting for her to come back. So Brendan started making visits to the concierge woman who had found Phoebe's body. This woman was super traumatized by the whole incident, and reasonably so. She took some time off work, and she's declined to speak to the media as well, and fair enough. But Brendan started coming by. He brought her flowers and chocolates, and according to this woman, he kept really trying to push this whole idea that Phoebe committed suicide onto her. And she was just really not interested in talking about it at all, and couldn't really understand why this guy just kept showing up trying to convince her that Phoebe had committed suicide. Like, she didn't really have anything to do with anything besides the fact that she found Phoebe. She said that he was showing up specifically to talk about Phoebe's mental state like 2 or 3 times a week for the first few weeks, until she finally just straight up asked him to stop. And I think she works in the building, he lives in the building, so she probably has to be kind of nice to him, and probably felt that she couldn't really say too much. But then it's like, you're harassing me, fucking leave me alone. Brandon later said of this situation that he was just trying to be nice because it was close to Christmas time. So that's the information that we have about how Anthony was handling the situation, how he was behaving after the situation. Again, these are other people's accounts who generally, I'd say, are suspicious of Anthony. So we should take these things with a grain of salt. But I think there's some red flags there. Now, I think it's a good time to discuss Natalie and Lauren. So Natalie Hansjuk, Phoebe's mother, and her father, Lauren. Again, this is Lauren Campbell, retired police officer, or he was a retired detective. They've kind of conducted their own investigation because, as I said, the police pretty much just decided this was a suicide and moved on with their lives. And Natalie and Lauren and the rest of Phoebe's family, they don't really buy that, or at the very least, they don't think that it was investigated thoroughly enough. And I definitely fall into that camp. I don't think that this was investigated thoroughly enough. They didn't even take the security footage. That is insane. Why? Anyway, they conducted their own investigation. Natalie and her father have spent years poring over the very little evidence that they have. And Phoebe's whole family, again, dissatisfied with the police work. They didn't think that it was out of the question that Phoebe would commit suicide or that she could. But throwing herself feet first down a garbage chute just did not seem like something that she would do on purpose. It did not seem like the type of, the way that she would kill herself. Especially somebody who's so into drugs. It made more sense. It would make more sense if she overdosed on something. She also lived on the 12th floor and had her own balcony. Why go down a garbage chute when you could just jump off? I don't know. And I do agree, this is really weird. And now it does kind of speak to another theory, and we'll get into it with the coroner's inquest, is that there is another option that's not suicide and it's not homicide, and that is accidental death. And so the theory would be that she was really out of it while she was on Stilnox and maybe mixed with other things. And she, for whatever reason, was so out of it that she put herself down the garbage chute and didn't actually intend to kill herself. So that is an option. And I'd say it's in the realm of possibility. Now, Lauren and Natalie, in their investigation, they created a replica of the garbage chute to test the theory to see if Phoebe could have done this herself. This is something that the police did not do, interestingly. Lauren called up the company who made the garbage chute system, the one that was used in the Valencia, and they got them to make him an exact replica. They got one of Phoebe's friends, who is a similar size to Phoebe, to attempt to get into the chute herself. And this was all done on an episode of 60 Minutes, Australia. Now, the chute entrance is 1 meter off the ground, and the opening only about 36.5 centimeters. It was very hard to balance, but the girl was able to get in the chute, and it did require a little bit of help and guidance. The main difference is that the girl who did the experiment was completely sober, while Phoebe was definitely intoxicated. Lauren also did another test, and it was to see if Phoebe could have been fed down the chute. It is definitely possible that a very strong and tall person could have put her down the chute, specifically if she was incapacitated. A sleep expert also weighed in on that 60 Minutes feature and noted that there were 2 possible adverse reactions to taking this medication, the Stilnox medication. 1, delusional determination, which could have actually helped her get into the chute herself. Or 2, physical incapacitation, which could have been consistent with somebody putting her down the chute. Now, he said that there's no way to know which one had occurred. Phoebe had taken Stilnox before and had no adverse side effects. It doesn't mean that she wouldn't in the future, or that mixing it with other sort of drugs could not have, caused it, but we don't know. And that's the interesting thing that the police, or the coroner's inquiry, which again we still have not gotten to, but that they could determine between scenario 1, delusional determination, or 2, physical incapacitation. The sleep expert is saying there's no way you could have known which one it was. So to choose one is perhaps not reasonable. And now, again, this is only one person's opinion. And then there's the question of the jeans. Did they get pulled down to her knees before or after she went into the chute? Certainly, if it was before she went into the chute, it would have made getting her there. And then there's the question of the jeans. Did they get pulled down to her knees before or after she went down the chute? Did she pull the jeans down, or did somebody else pull the jeans down? Certainly, if the jeans were pulled before she went down the chute, it would have made getting into the chute by herself impossible. So to assume that she put herself down the chute, we have to assume that she started taking her pants off after she had hit the bottom, after her foot was severed. There was no obvious signs of sexual assault, but then again, sexual assault, as I said before, does not often leave a mark. But it has been theorized by some that somebody, if Phoebe was incapacitated, somebody could have pulled her pants down to keep her legs together in order to more easily put her into the chute. So I don't know if that makes sense to you if you're visualizing it properly, but imagine you have a limp, possibly, no, not dead, because she's not dead until she went down, but possibly passed out person, and you're trying to shove them down a garbage chute, and their legs are flopping everywhere, so you pull their pants down so that their legs stay together. These pants were like a skinny jean, very tight jean. So by pulling the pants down to her knees, it would have held her legs together very well. That's a theory. So in March of 2013, there was a coronal inquest. Now, I don't think over here in North America that we have this same type of thing. In Australia, the Coroner's Court of Western Australia is a specialist court established to investigate certain types of deaths. The purpose of these investigations is to determine the cause and manner of death, and also to consider ways that similar deaths may be prevented in the future. That's the reason for a coroner's inquest. Now, Natalie and Lauren had been trying to get this coroner's inquest for a long time, for a number of years, because they were so unsatisfied with the investigation and the police's ruling of a suicide. Anthony Hamble, however, opposed the inquest. His lawyers argued that there was not enough evidence to point away from suicide. However, the inquest did proceed in 2013. The inquest was done by Coroner Peter White, and it took 14 days. There were 30 witnesses and thousands of pages of evidence. And I can put it in the notes, but I have the actual, I guess it's his determination, the Peter White's papers that says his findings. It's a long document though. So senior Melbourne barrister Deborah Semensma assisted Peter White during the inquiry and submitted a 65-page recommendation after the fact, suggesting that there should be what's called an open finding. An open finding is when you say, look, we don't know what happened, but upon any sort of new evidence, we will continue to investigate. That's what she thought it should be. She felt there was not enough evidence to determine whether Phoebe's death was accidental or deliberate, and it would mean that the case could be reinvestigated in the future. This is it is very rare for a coroner to disagree with a recommendation, but Peter White disagreed with Deborah and decided that Phoebe had met her death through accidental misadventure, meaning that she caused her own death. He was convinced that the still knocks mixed with alcohol caused her to climb into the garbage chute and plummet to her death. It's interesting because a number of toxicology experts claimed during the inquiry that typical behavior by somebody affected by still knocks and alcohol would be doing a task that they normally do throughout the day, something such as driving or cooking, more of like a sleepwalking type of thing. Not something that almost no one does ever and requires great physical skill like climbing by themselves into a garbage chute. Peter White also made the claim in his finding that Phoebe must have used her arms and legs to brace herself against the side of the chute. I'm sorry, I lost my spot. He felt that because she didn't have many extra injuries, that she must not have plummeted directly downward. I don't know with what expertise he has to make these determinations, but he did. But it appears to be disproven by a number of tests done by Lauren and his friends, which, again, Lauren's maybe not an expert, so I don't know. But Lauren, again, and he's done even more experiments since the first one of putting Phoebe's friends down these replica garbage chutes. None of them could figure a way to get down the chute without having their arms left above their head, which would go against what Peter is saying, because Peter's saying that her arms in some way braced against the chute while she was going down, where these people, like, they couldn't do it. Oh, my armpits are okay. But they could not get down the chute without having their arms directly above their heads, and they once they're above your head, it's too small. You can't get them down to brace yourself. You can't, like, do this. I'm in a closet, so it's basically a garbage chute. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any way to by yourself get yourself down a chute without leaving your arms above your head. 4 expert witnesses in the inquiry also said that there was no evidence that Phoebe had attempted to control her fall. The shaft was nasty and dirty. It was a garbage chute, for God's sake. And it was full of crap, and there was no associated residue on her arms and legs to indicate that she had braced. Peter White also made the ruling that Anthony Hampel was completely exonerated of any responsibility for Phoebe's death at the request of his lawyers, so he granted that. So to be clear, this is the story that the coroner wants us to buy. Phoebe is chilling in her apartment. She's been drinking and has taken still knocks. We know she's upset, and she's seems to be in a pretty bad mental state. But now she's in some sort of semi-conscious state where she's like in some sort of delusional state, basically. She breaks a glass, picks up some pieces, cuts herself on them, getting blood on her computer and the doorway. She puts the pieces in a garbage bag, but leaves a number of pieces on the floor in the apartment. She then puts her sunglasses on her head and heads to the garbage chute with the garbage bag. She enters the garbage chute room, gets blood on the doorway from, I guess, her cut hand. She chucks the bag down the chute, a bag that has never been found or checked for. Then she climbs into the chute herself, still in a delusional state. Her arms at her side leaving no discernible prints or blood on the actual garbage chute. On the way down the chute, she braces herself on the sides using her arms and legs, and once at the bottom, after her foot is nearly severed off her leg, she then pulls down her pants to her knees, crawls around for a bit. She also takes her belt out of some loops, which maybe she needed to do that before she took her pants, we don't know. And she crawls around for a bit until she dies of blood loss. The only way to open the case back up is for new and compelling evidence to present itself, the most obvious being a witness or a confession. So that's how the inquiry ended. And I think a lot of people had problems with that. Personally, what do I think? I don't know. I think that I agree with the assistant lady, Deborah. I think this should be an open, what do they call it? Undetermined or whatever. I don't think anybody's proven anything. There's not, it's a mystery. And the internet is interesting because the internet, sorry, my foot's asleep. Excuse me. At least the internet's a big place, but the areas of the internet that I checked, people think that he did it. They really do. And I think it's possible. I don't personally see enough evidence to point at that indefinitely. But a lot of people do think that he did it. And just because a lot of people think something doesn't make it true, I think that's obvious. But I think it's crazy that the coroner, it's weird because here a coroner is like a pathologist or whatever, a dead body doctor. So I get really confused with this coroner's inquiry because it was very confusing reading this because I kept thinking that was what they were talking about, but it's something entirely different. But I don't think anybody's proved the case that she committed suicide. I don't think she committed suicide. I agree that this is a really weird way to commit suicide unless she like really was trying to make a statement of being like, I hate myself, like I think I'm trash. But it just seems like not a guarantee to kill yourself. And there's like so many other ways that you could kill yourself. So to me, it sounds like the medication caused her to be in some sort of delusional state and for some reason put herself down a garbage chute, or somebody did something bad to her. And Aunt does seem like the most logical person, but who knows? Again, no security footage was taken, so it could literally have been anyone. Now, there's another very interesting tidbit after the fact. So years later, in 2018, another young woman, 25-year-old Bailey Schneider, was found dead in her apartment. She had a gold cord wrapped tightly around her neck, and the police determined that she had committed suicide. Despite the fact that there didn't seem to be anywhere Bailey could have hung herself from, they determined that she had like sat down and like choked herself on a cabinet, which is a hard thing to do, but is a thing that people do. I feel like a lot of people in prison do that. I think like Israel Keys did that. I think he also stabbed himself too, though. There was no sign of forced entry or any sort of struggle. Her autopsy determined that she had been drinking. Her blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal driving limit. And she had traces of cocaine in her system, as well as Zoloft and Xanax. Not exactly like Phoebe, but very similar. Bailey's family was not satisfied with the investigation, and they did not think that she had committed suicide. But the state's deputy chief coroner, Caitlin English, accepted the investigation's findings and ruled that Bailey's death was a tragic suicide. Bailey was a very beautiful young woman. She was a part-time dental hygienist and part-time model/promoter type thing. Bailey had grown up in Queensland, Australia, and at age 19, she moved to Melbourne to enroll in a dental assistant program. And she took part-time work as a fashion merchandiser, which seems like how she ended up getting into modeling. Her modeling gigs then led her into the nightclub scene, which it's believed that's where she kind of got into binge drinking and cocaine and partying and all that stuff. And again, it's not an uncommon leap. So, what does Bailey's death have to do with Phoebe's? Nothing really. It's just that Bailey was also in some sort of relationship with 52-year-old Anthony Hamble. Anthony has denied that there was any sort of official relationship, but Bailey's conversations with her mother suggest otherwise, as do the message history between her and Anthony. Also, the fact that they had gone on at least 2 trips together. It appears that they had some sort of relationship for about 9 months. Bailey had a lot of similarities to Phoebe. Bailey was described by loved ones as very vivacious and fun. She was the type of girl to put herself out there, and she liked to party and be social. She also had very similar issues with drugs and partying to Phoebe. Bailey was also said to be suffering from anxiety and was prescribed Zoloft, and it seemed at the time of her death, Bailey's parents were attempting to really be there for their daughter to help her get her life back in order. They had moved from Queensland to Melbourne to be with Bailey while she entered a new applied medical sciences program and took a new job at a dental practice. And although it looks like her parents were really attempting to help Bailey and be there for her, it looks like she was doing a little bit of sneaking around behind their backs and trying to avoid their tactics. Kind of another weird one, it also appears that Bailey had 2 phones. Which, that doesn't seem like a very common thing unless you're a drug dealer. I don't know why you'd need 2 phones. But also, neither of which were collected by police when she died. Interesting. So, this is what we know about the night leading up to Bailey's death. June 22nd, 2018. Bailey told her parents that she was going to a barbecue at Anthony's home, and she would be spending the night there. Instead, Bailey went to a nightclub where she worked as a dancer from 6:45 p.m. to 1 a.m. At 1:08 a.m., Bailey took a taxi to the suburb of Toruk for a party. This was a very high-end suburb, apparently very wealthy. At that party, she spent most of the night arguing with Anthony over text. Her friends said that she was very upset that night. At 8 a.m., Bailey took a taxi back to her parents' home. At 10 a.m., Bailey's mother found her crying in her room and having some sort of panic attack. Bailey explained that she and Anthony, had broken up. After speaking with Bailey for some amount of time about the breakup, both parents then left to go get groceries while Bailey stayed home and watched a movie on Netflix. And apparently her older brother Ryan was home in his room at the back of the house. When Bailey's parents arrived home a short while later, they found her lying on the kitchen floor. Her head was leaning against a lower cabinet, and she had blood dripping from her nose, and a curtain tie from her bedroom was tightly knotted around her neck. Bailey's father cut the curtain tie with a knife and attempted to do CPR, but it was not helpful because she was already dead. Now, it's definitely possible that both women's deaths were accidents or suicides. I don't think Bailey's would have been an accident. That doesn't make any sense. That would have been a suicide. And Anthony was just a very unlucky guy to have 2 24, 25-year-old girlfriends of his die in weird ways like that. But it's also quite the coincidence, in my opinion. Some people also suggest that Anthony is just, the scummy type of guy to get into relationships with much younger, more vulnerable women who are clearly struggling with their mental health and who have substance abuse issues. And that just, that population of people is more likely to die in a weird accidental way or a suicide. It's definitely possible. But I don't know. It's a really big coincidence. And there's a lot of things investigation-wise that I think are kind of unanswered. There was also, I think they found in the coroner's inquiry, sorry, I didn't put this in earlier, but I'm just remembering it now. There was these weird bruises found on Phoebe, under her arms, kind of her rib area, that to some experts said indicated somebody holding her and shoving her. So that is maybe a little bit of evidence towards somebody putting her in the garbage chute. But it also could have been something else. Yeah, as I said, the internet's like really, really thinks that he did it. Again, I don't know. I watched another person's video who's talking specifically about the mental health aspects of this whole case, who didn't seem to think he did it and seemed to think that both deaths were Phoebe's more accidental and the second one suicide. And the comment section of his video was just, everyone was like, dude, you're so wrong. Like, there was not one person agreeing with him. Most comment sections of anything talking about this case are 90 to 99% people thinking that he did it, which is pretty crazy. And I think a lot of people see this very wealthy guy with very well connected parents who know exactly how to play the legal system. This man was a ex-Supreme Court judge, justice, whatever they call it in Australia, and the stepmother, a current county judge or whatever. These are very high up positions in the legal system. Phoebe's mother mentioned that when she was preparing for the coroner's inquest, their side needed a lawyer or whatever, and she found it really hard to find a lawyer because every person who found out who she was going up against was basically said that they had a conflict of interest because they knew George Hampel or they had been involved with him in some way, and it was hard for her to find somebody who didn't claim conflict of interest. So that's, to me, that's very evident of how prominent Antony's father was in this whole world. We have no doubt that he had the best lawyers, the best of the best money could buy. Like, this is like dream team, OJ level team behind Antony. That being said, I don't know, Bailey's death does really sound like a suicide. Her brother was in the house. Like, for Antony to have done it, you have to assume, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all, but that she's messaging with him because her brother did say that he did see her on the phone before she died, but that she's talking with Aunt. He comes over. Her brother's unaware that she comes over. He takes this curtain tie thing or whatever and chokes her, and then leaves her sitting in the kitchen. I don't know. I wish Hanna was here so that she could say. I don't know. I really don't know what she would say. I don't know. I think Hanna would probably think that he did it. I do feel like he did it, and I think that there's a lot of people who make really compelling arguments. There is a podcast that I listened to in its entirety, and it's all about this case. It's a number of episodes. I think it's called Phoebe's Fall, and they, all the information that's here is in there, but there's probably a little bit even more. But they'd reached out to Antony. His lawyers just sent back a thing being like, we're not going to talk to you, and like, you should cease and desist, basically. Vanessa wouldn't talk to them. So the internet really only has one side, which is where I hesitate. But two young girlfriends dying in very similar circumstances, that's really weird. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think about my solo episode. I feel like this is my first try, so I don't know. Maybe I'll get an opportunity to do another one. I'm out of breath. I'm hot. I'm sweaty. But yeah, it's a sad case, and it's never pleasant when a young person loses their life, and especially in such a weird way, and what sounds like a really awful way, to basically die because your foot has been severed from your leg and dying just alone in a garbage chute room. It's awful. So, that one goes out to Phoebe, and please reach out. Let us know what you think. I'm so curious as to what people here think about whether or not this was suicide, accident, or murder. Because I don't know. Reach out on Instagram at Who's Knocking Podcast, Twitter at Who's Knocking Pod, email hello@whosknocking.com. I think we're also on Facebook. And stay safe out there, because you never know who's knocking. Goodbye. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.